I'd done all this work in white marble because it was inexpensive again, and able to get a lot of things done. And I was going around to try and find a gallery to show it in, and everything was steel at that time. And finally, I came upon Bonino Gallery, which was at that time, we're talking now, early 1970, 71, something like that. Nanda Bonino, she had a big gallery. I mean, she was bigger than Marlborough. She had a gallery in Buenos Aires. She had one in Rio de Janeiro. She had one in Rome, and a big place on 57th Street. And she said, "I'll give you a show." So I had my first show and sold some work, and that was really the beginning of my career.
A good start.
It was yeah. I've always felt that if I hadn't taken the kind of crazy risk that Neutra put to me, I wouldn't have. The risk brought the reward.
Absolutely. It reminds me of something I used to tell my students in North Dakota: get as far away from here as quick as possible. So when you told me that story before, I was just like, maybe I was always giving them exactly the right advice.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to it. Of course, I mean, if you look at it logically, I don't know if I'd have the courage myself to tell other students to do this, because there's so many bad things that could have happened to you along the way.
Sure.
But there was it's a moment of grace, I guess. I had a big success for me at that time, not with Nanda, but when I had the show at Nanda's, at Bonino's, this young curator came up to me and says, "I want to show your work." And she was like, really brash. And I said, "Oh, great." And she said, "Yeah, I'll be in touch." And then she left. And in fact, she contacted me. I was in Italy. She said, "I have a gallery now." It was Hamilton Gallery, Patricia Hamilton. And she was a force unto herself. And so I showed with her, and she sold stuff like crazy. I mean, she was just a selling machine. And everything I did was sold. And that went on for quite a few years. About that same time, I started getting some very large projects. And one of the projects that came along was the project for the city of Atlanta, Georgia. It's called the Fulton County Government Center. Fulton County and Atlanta are one and the same, but their government center was called the Fulton County Building. And they asked me to do the atrium with fountains and other public meeting spaces, which I did. And it's probably the largest project I've ever done, a multi-million-dollar project, 3 fountains. And then I finished that, I believe, in '94, and it was opened by Coretta King. And I had been so busy for like 3 years on that project, I didn't notice that the art market had collapsed. I finished that project, and I was so used to the telephone ringing all the time, and it was nothing. Just dead air.
Right.
And there was, like the market crash, or God, I don't even know what it was now. It's like, but there was nothing. And I thought, well, this will be good, because all the rats in the art world, they'll all die. No. All the good people.
They learned to eat the scraps.
Yeah, all the good people died. And so, and then I decided the dollar had gone down, and there was a lot of issues, and I had a new son, and my wife and I decided that we would give up our studio in Italy and come back to the United States. And I got back here, and there was no place to work. I thought, well, where can I make anything? It's a very dirty, heavy task to make stuff in stone. So I I thought, I have to build a place, get a big studio. And I went to Seward Johnson Jr., who had been a major collector of mine. And I told him, I said, look, I'm back, I'm living here. I want to make a state-of-the-art stone studio. And would you finance it for me? I was meeting him in his home. And I tell you, the meeting didn't go more than 10 minutes. And he said to me, sure, how much do you need? I said, I need a few $1,000,000. Yeah, great, let's do it. So there's one condition, you will direct it. And you must promise me that you'll do that. I said, okay. And I said, first I'm going to have to travel around for a few months to determine the feasibility and to see what there is here in the United States. And I went on a whirlwind trip across the United States and all the stoneworking areas in Georgia, in Vermont, and taking names of any individuals that I was interested in what they were doing, but looking at what the studios they had consisted of. And they were really primitive by Italian standards. I went all the way out to the West Coast, and it took a few months, and then I wrote a paper on the feasibility of it, and money was given to me. And and I started, got a place. It was across from the Johnson Atelier, and I called the place the Stone Division. It was like an airplane hangar, and we had a 30-ton overhead crane, and began looking to buy and order equipment. Of course, it took time to get the stuff made. Everything was, a one-off. It was made specially. And the most advanced machine I ever saw, I saw a picture of in one of the fairs I went to in Italy, and it was the machine was a 5-axis machine made for the Sultan of Brunei for doing columns for his palaces. The first one ever made. And that was made by a company called OMAG. I went to OMAG and I ordered 2 machines, milling machines, a large one which could manage a 4-foot diameter by 10-foot length, a whole block of stone, and a smaller one which is 2 foot by 5 feet. And I ordered a Pellegrini saw, 2-axis machine, wire saw. And my purpose, the focus I had at that time, the clients I was looking for were artists like myself who would bring in models, and the models would then be made from something 6 inches high or whatever scale they were working in, and enlarged in stone. With these machines, which were highly complex and computer driven and operated, it was like getting up to speed was a huge task. And they sent over a teacher from the OMAG company. And in my travels, I had met a couple of individuals who I thought would be hires for me. One was Christoph Spaff, who was a German-trained stone carver, and the other was a fellow named Mark Fredenberg. And I hired them, and they came on, and Mark was to be the head stone carver, and Christoph was going to be the shop foreman, was what they were hired for. But there was no way of getting from a model at that time to a program that the machines would accept.
So initially you hadn't intended for it to be digital, it just was because the large equipment required that.
Yeah. But there was no way of getting from a digital image to the machine. The only programs they had at that time were machinist programs. And of course, they were things they were like geometric and solid planes, and they were not what I would call sculptural or handworked kinds of objects. So I went on a quest looking at the animation industry and the auto industry, because the auto industry were utilizing sculptors to do the body designs of the cars.
Sure.
And I thought, well, that'll be an area. And then I saw a advertisement at that time, which really excited me. And I believe it was a Coca-Cola ad, but it was people dancing. And a guy would jump in the air, and you would see completely around him. I thought, that's what I need to be able to get that kind of a holographic information.
Sure.
And there was a group down in Baltimore, and I went down and visited them, and they had a room. It was like a green room, but it had 300 cameras, which were all highly synchronized. It was an incredible operation, but it cost thousands of dollars to get something in there, so it was just not practicable for me to utilize that. And I went to the next, and the animation industry really didn't work out either, because the objects they were making with animation didn't have the hand in them. At an auto show in Chicago, I discovered a digital acquisition device that they were using in doing auto bits. And it was an articulated arm and a program, the program being one of the main things. And you would take this digital arm, move it manually, but it would move,
Sure.
every which way. And you would keep a kind of a right angle to the object, and you could move around the object, and the program would take these pixels, and sew them together.
Make a point cloud.
Make a point cloud, exactly. But it was a very kind of a awkward thing to manipulate, but we worked with it, and we were able to get some things done with that. And I was still searching, and then I came across.
That was very time consuming even still to do that.
Yeah, to acquire. It was very time consuming. I came across this guy in Denmark, Copenhagen. His name was Claus Nielsen, and he had a company called Scantech. He was an electrical engineer, highly intelligent, highly trained, and I can't remember where I first saw it, but he had a device for acquiring restoration elements in early buildings. And it was basically a grid. It was fastened onto the side of a building, and then across this grid would move a laser beam which would acquire sometimes sculpture, whatever they were trying to acquire. I contacted him, and he was like a one-man shop. The best, a really bright guy. And I told him what I needed. He said, I can make that. I said, wow, that'd be fabulous. Let's do it. And so he made this device, a little machine, and basically it was just a turntable, but it had on it a stanchion and a laser that moved up and down. And so the thing would move, and the laser would move up and down and acquire the object in extraordinary detail. I mean, we're talking like taking a measurement every thousandth of an inch,
Sure.
And the cloud that it came up was fabulous, but I was getting objects, but I still couldn't get to the machines. Again, Claus came.
You have to translate the point cloud.
That's
to
exactly
a CAD-CAM
exactly.
cloud.
And again, Claus came through. Oh, I can do that. The thing was, there was no big market for this kind of activity in this world, in the sculpture world.
Yeah, and strangely, it's so ubiquitous now. Everybody can do it with their
Yeah.
cell phones.
Oh yeah, now it's something else. But then it wasn't, believe me. So Claus again came up with a program that meshed with the program that the machines had, and we were off and running. It was phenomenal. And of course, as you know, when you had the points in the cloud, you could do all kinds of interesting things. You could make the object fatter. You could stretch it out. You could increase things in different areas, and still you had all the handwork and detail. I mean, it was just great.
Sure.
So the next thing was that, of course, I had to make money for the board that was that was behind Seward Johnson and gave me the money.
You're doing all this good R&D, and they're like, "Where's the cash?"
Where's the cash? So I had to find people, and I mean, the word spread pretty rapidly that there was something happening.
Sure.
And so clients began to arrive, and I was looking for clients that were willing to exploit this. Now, you have to remember that I'm still like old school, because I'm only thinking about, how can we get these machines to relieve and make less expensive some of these really difficult tasks? And so we had to make a transition into a new way of thinking about this. So some of the early people, I mean, you came by early. Barry Ball, John Isherwood. We did we had a lot of museums who were coming by. We had very particular things with high tolerances. We did some things for the Tokyo Museum where they had a lot of Egyptian objects that, I mean, they had really high, I'm talking minuscule tolerances. And we could do that with these machines. So we could do bases, for instance, that a normal base might cost $5,000. For them, it cost $15,000, and they were willing to pay to get the kind of tolerances they needed for these very precious objects. So I managed to sort of like break even. That's all that was required of me. Keep it on an even keel. Barry Ball and John became excited about the possibility of making some of their stuff on these machines. And it became apparent immediately that the milling path could become something to be manipulated and utilized in an expressive way. Barry Ball at that time was taking these kind of like life masks, or almost like death masks, although he wouldn't call them that, but and then milling them. We'd acquire them and mill them in different sizes. And so he began playing with doing the same object with different milling paths. And John, who was working differently, John Isherwood, he was, sometimes taking things like tubing and manipulating it into a shape that he was interested in, and then having that milled and playing with the milling patterns. So I was very keen to be as supportive of their work as I could at that time, because I really felt that they were going to be in the vanguard, and other people would see it and be interested in it. That it did work that way. Of course, I also utilized the machines myself for projects that I had, but I was still working in an older way in that I was using them to get rid of a lot of material. And the beauty of some of these things, like the Pellegrini saw, for instance, was that you came away with a negative. You didn't have all waste like you used to have in the past. But I was utilizing them for making large things, and not so much interested in the milling path. Now, one of the fascinating things that came about was I began thinking about, in the case of Barry Ball's work, he had people that were finishing his pieces by imitating the machines by hand. And so I thought, that's, what's that about? It's highly unusual. So you've got man imitating a machine. That's interesting, but very bizarre. I'm not sure. It's kind of like, the Weissman thing of, the most exotic art is something that's real that looks artificial. Yeah, I can get behind that. I can play with that, or I can think about that. But it was very strange to me, because I'm always someone looking at a sculpture with the hand and the touch and the color that would arrive from the way one processed it. And So all of a sudden you have this machine imitating that, and then you got a man imitating the machine. So that was, something of interest. And John, John did put handwork into his, he did intervene. So he was, in that sense, he was still hanging on to some traditional habits, let's call them habits at this point. And then, of course, I became aware of people like you who were really had been working on the computer.
Yeah, directly modeling and designing.
Which was another whole thing. But I came to understanding that much later. Like I say, my initial impulse was to get a way to make objects
Sure.
inexpensively and interestingly.